Julio wins his first automated strike zone challenge. Plus, are we witnessing the comeback of the Mitch-Wich? That's all coming up on this episode of Bleav in Mariners. What is up, sports fans? Wow, it is sure nice to see a couple of crooked numbers on the scoreboard just a few games into spring training for the Seattle Mariners. This team has put up 33 runs on something like 41 hits over the last 3 games, and boy, has it been fun to watch. From the veterans getting in on the action, seeing some resurgence from Mitch Garver, Mitch Haniger, to the kids like Luzardo Montes and Ryan Bliss. They're swinging the bat freely, hitting the ball hard. It just seems like this entire Mariners team is loose right now, having a fun spring training. They're out there not thinking about swinging the bat, just getting hits. And frankly, I don't think that's something that we've been able to say. Like, this team is out there just having fun and not thinking about hitting the ball, something that we haven't been able to say about the Seattle Mariners in a very long time. Lots of other things to talk about. There's been so many spring training storylines. The new blonde locks of all of our starting outfielders in Seattle. Andres Muñoz's new changeup, I Bleav it's called like a kick change, has like a 10-inch drop or something like that. We've only got so much time, though, for this episode. Welcome on into this latest episode of Bleav in Mariners. I'm Jordon Schultz, more affectionately known as Schultz, a Pacific Northwest talk show host from Portland, Oregon. We got to talk about a lot of stuff happening in spring training. Of course, there was another Mariners transaction over the weekend that we got to dive into a bit. I'll react to Julio winning that first ABS challenge, the automated strike zone, being tried out in spring training in Major League Baseball. And I'll explain why I think, first, why I love that Julio won his challenge and why I think that this system is good for baseball, in my opinion. And we witnessed that Mariners offensive onslaught over those last 3 spring training games. I'm taping this as the Dodgers game's happening on Tuesday. It leads me to ask, is the official return of the Mitch-Wich upon us? So lots of great topics to get to in this episode 20 of Bleav in Mariners. Do want to mention, though, we are trying to grow the community here on the podcast. Would love to get to know other content creators in the Mariners space and get some more listeners, but really just get to know other Mariners fans. That's the main reason I'm doing this. And we've got a couple of giveaways that we're trying to get out there. When we hit 100 subscribers on the Bleav in Mariners YouTube channel, we've got a Topps Chrome 2019 rookie auto of Andres Muñoz. So holding on to that until we hit 100 subscribers. We'll give that away in a live stream. And then on Apple Podcasts, I'm looking for 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. And once we hit those 100 5-star ratings, I've got a 2019 Topps Transcendent Edgar Martinez autograph to give away. And that's kind of hard to part with. I'm not going to lie. Edgar Martinez is my favorite Mariner. I'm not sure if I've said that more than once on this podcast, but I've got a couple of autographs of him and figured that would be a really good way to incentivize some listeners to check the podcast out. And so, yeah, looking for 100 5-star ratings on the Apple Podcast service. Once we hit that, we're going to do like I said, a live stream giving away both of those autographs, and I'll probably throw some other stuff in as well because I love doing giveaways. All right, so getting all the business out of the way here on Bleav in Mariners, let's dive into all the spring training storylines that have been happening over the last few days. But really, the first one that we got to look quickly at is the latest move made by the Seattle Mariners. It involves a familiar name, of course. Relief pitcher Trevor Gott signed to a minor league deal with an invitation to spring training. This is going to be Gott's second stint with the M's. He was with the club on a 1-year, $1.2 million deal after the Mariners signed him in November of 2022. Had a pretty decent year, at least half a year with the Mariners, 4.03 ERA, pitched 29 innings for Seattle. And then he and Chris Flexen were traded off to the Mets in July of that season. Had an okay rest of the year, ended up being able to spin a $1.5 million contract for himself with the A's, but tore his UCL during last spring training. That is where he is now having some rehab that supposedly at this point, I mean, if you look at the timeline of a Tommy John surgery and repair after a March initial injury, probably like a May or June return at this point. And Mariners like Trevor Gott, they always have guys that they are willing to throw in the pitching lab, and it's somebody that they've worked well with before. They think coming off an injury, it's basically a no-risk investment for them. It's got a lot of upside if he can use that veteran presence and get back to where he used to be or near where he used to be, which is a nice fastball sinker mix as a relief pitcher, sitting around 95 miles an hour. He can eat bullpen innings. And when he's healthy, he's been decent. He had a 23.7 strikeout rate, a 23.7% strikeout rate, compared to a 7% walk rate in 103 innings in the seasons with the Brewers, Mariners, and Mets that he played prior to this injury. So obviously, with the bullpen almost already being decided, I basically see this as an ancillary move. But I like that Seattle is still trying to tinker, because that's essentially what you can do with this ownership, right? You can't go make a big move, but they see these names of guys that they can get in for next to nothing. And that's a Mariners move. But I do like Trevor Gott. I mean, he was good when he was here, at least wasn't bad. And I think that if the Mariners, have some struggle with injury, or they're looking at some depth issues in the bullpen midseason, I think that a guy like Trevor Gott, if he's healthy by then, recovered from that Tommy John surgery, is somebody that they obviously think is going to be able to contribute. And it's not like a Ken Giles where they just had to give money to on a 2-year contract with a guy coming off a Tommy John surgery and waiting for him to get better. That didn't work out. So it's nice to see a piece like that added for almost no money. Moving on, Julio challenges his first ABS call. This happened versus the Arizona Diamondbacks on Sunday, and he actually gets the win. Let's listen to this clip. Gary Hill on the call for the Mariners radio network. It happened, I believe, in about the third inning. Yeah. Bottom three, Mariners were already up 8-1, but Julio saw a strike call that did not look even close, according to him. Let's take a listen.
Pitch. Strike. Julio didn't like that one, and he challenges. Wow, we've seen a lot of challenges here today compared to the first day. Julio did not like it immediately, and he's right. That was a ball.
Yeah, Gary Hill pointing out that Julio was pretty upset about that call pretty quickly, and it was because the pitch was so low below the zone. And the automated strike zone isn't perfect yet. I know that essentially it's a 17-inch wide box, and it's based on, as far as the height goes, it varies, batter to batter. They actually make it a little bit more personalized, for Jose Altuve versus somebody like Aaron Judge. Obviously, the strike zone is going to be very different, and the automated strike zone accounts for that. The top of the zone is 53.5% of the batter's height is what I'm looking at here from Dr. Google, and the bottom is 27%. The zone is centered on the plate, 8.5 inches from the front and the back. So just kind of some background there on what the automated strike zone is going to be. And people are saying that the kinks aren't quite worked out yet. I mean, probably. I'm sure that, as we transition to putting that in Major League Baseball, there's going to be some things that need to be tinkered with. But when you're seeing a pitch that far below and the strike zone, and you're seeing Julio is upset immediately like that, and it's an obvious call that it's a ball, I mean, that's what the system's for, right? Even though it's not perfect, it's already made a positive impact. And that's why I think MLB needs to implement it as soon as possible. This call that we saw, it's basically a call that doesn't seem to be close at all, yet the umpires still, for some reason, are calling these, and I saw one to another player over the weekend that was at least 2 inches above the strike zone. They called that one a strike. The ABS call came out that it was a ball. Like this is happening with calls that aren't very close. These are changes on balls that are way out of the zone that were called strikes. This doesn't seem to be like a close one that Julio was upset about. It was way out of the zone if you go back and watch the clip. The very first ABS challenge by Cubs pitcher Cody Poteet, it was absolutely a strike. And the challenge showed that immediately to the umpire. And in Julio's instance, once again, the pitch obviously low, and the umpire had to wear it in front of everybody. And frankly, that's my favorite part of the new automated strike zone that we've seen so far in spring training. When an umpire is wrong, the ump being corrected in real time like that in front of the entire stadium and like God himself, well, that needs to happen way more often in sports. That is something that is super overdue in baseball and, in all the world of sports. Too often we see umpires and referees, they just get away with a bad call or a terrible call in an NBA game in the last 2 minutes. Yeah, it'll be acknowledged afterwards, but the affected team has already lost. There's really nothing you can do. I mean, like we said, there are still kinks in this system, I'm sure, that have to be worked out. Some minor changes that have to be made. But I love that we're entering a new world in which umpires do not have ultimate control over what the strike zone is and how players feel about it. I mean, I'm a guy that really likes player umpire arguments too. I love managers arguing with umpires. So it kind of pains me to be on this side of the argument. But frankly, I don't know. Would I rather watch the umpire and player get into it and the call never be changed? Or would I rather watch the umpire wear the wrong call that he just made or she just made in front of everybody and then have to deal with it and maybe think a little bit more about that next call? And that's, I think, hopefully what the ABS can do, at least for the 2025 season, because it seems like this is going to be the last year that we're going to have, because after spring training is done, we're going to go back to the major league umpires calling the strikes and balls themselves. So maybe seeing these results on the ABS will make them feel a little bit worse for calling those strikes as balls or balls as strikes, and maybe make them think twice during the season, or maybe they'll feel more emboldened. I'm not sure. But after seeing what I've seen so far in spring training, I'd be shocked if we didn't see MLB implement automated balls and strikes in 2026. And I'm a huge fan of it. I love it. Make these umpires wear it in front of everybody. Please, never let that stop. And we cannot talk about the first few spring training games without talking about the absolute offensive storm that the Seattle Mariners unleashed. Mentioned it at the top of the podcast here on Bleav in Mariners. 33 runs over the weekend against the Angels, D-backs, and Brewers, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, on something like 41 hits. It wasn't just a couple of players either. If you look at these box scores, I got them right in front of me. It was basically everybody that got in on the action, from the young guys to the veteran. Seattle scoring 10 runs against the Angels on Saturday. Ty Pete, one of the young kids, I Bleav he's like 19, got an RBI against a major league pitcher. You saw some hits. Luke Raley getting in on the action, got a nice RBI in that game. Hogan Windish, the young second baseman, he had a home run. I Bleav that was one of two for him over the weekend. Nick Dunn getting in on the action as well. Had a nice double and a couple of RBIs late in the game to help the Mariners get some more runs up on the scoreboard. So a lot of guys getting in on that action on Saturday. And then Sunday, even more so, you saw Victor Robles get his first hit of spring training. Mitch Haniger getting a bomb home run over the left field fence. Was nice to see him getting into one. Hogan Windish with another home run. Nice to see Windish getting a couple of bombs in there. Maybe he'll play himself onto the roster sometime this year. I mean, if he's, I know it's spring training, but if he's already into balls like that, if he's hitting them as hard as he is this early in spring training, it means he's seeing the ball very well. And I'm assuming that's something that Mariners coaches need to focus on. But beyond that, we had lots of other guys getting in as well. Nick Dunn, a couple of more hits on Sunday. Harry Ford got a nice 2 RBI single on Sunday as well to help the Mariners to that 12-8 win over the Brewers. And then on Monday, it just freaking continued. Mitch Garver having a nice 2-for-2 day, hitting the ball harder in that game than he did all season in 2024 on one of those hits. JP Crawford getting in on the action as well. He went 2-for-2. Dominic Canzone going 2-for-3. Tyler Locklear getting a nice couple of RBIs on a hit in that one. I mean, so you look up and down here, Ben Williamson having a really good spring as well. The young third baseman that already looks like a Major League Baseball player. He's like, 2021? Looks like he's like 27, 28 years old. Ben Williamson having a great opening weekend as well. And Ryan Bliss getting a nice RBI double at one point over the weekend off of the center field wall. But I think the big one from Monday's game was that mammoth home run from Lizardo Montes off of the center field, basically monster. It's kind of marked after one point in center field after it transitions from left. If you haven't seen that stadium that the Mariners were playing in, or the spring training home of the Mariners, I Bleav it was at Mariners home park in Peoria. It basically in center field cuts off to the right side of the wall, where if you hit the wall, it's a home run, and that's exactly what Lizardo Montes did. Lizardo Montes. Just what a freaking game for him. Nice to see that in front of his family. Austin Shenton getting in on the action over the weekend. Couple of hits as well. So, yeah, some guys popping up with some good performances that you maybe weren't expecting. Maybe like a Nick Dunn. Maybe like an Austin Shenton. You're seeing Ryan Bleav taking advantage of his at-bats. And with the Mariners just looking free and fun and very loose right now in spring training, anything's possible. And I know I'm talking about this as they are playing the LA Dodgers. And actually, it was kind of fun to see a pretty normal pitching matchup. I think for the first time in spring, leading into the Dodgers game, it was The Rock, La Piedra, versus Blake Snell for the Dodgers. And we're see a lot of those great pitching matchups this season. So definitely something to look forward to. And as far as the pitching side of things go, not a lot of guys were getting in that we're going to be seeing much of in the regular season. Besides, of course, Emerson Hancock did start for Seattle against the Diamondbacks. You also saw Logan Gilbert getting in. You also saw a couple of young relief pitchers getting in as well that we might be seeing in a few years. But then Saucedo, Thornton, the regular parts of the bullpen, Snyder and Spire getting some work as well. Looking okay. I know Logan Gilbert did give up a couple of runs, but hey, he did strike out 3 in that bottom of the first inning that he had against the Brewers. So, we're not really too surprised that pitchers are kind of inconsistent at this point, having decent games as opposed to some not having decent games. I'm really more interested in what the hitters are doing. I know the Mariners pitching lab works, and I think y'all are concerned more with what the hitters are doing as opposed to the pitchers as well. We know what the starting rotation is going to be. We basically know what the bullpen's going to be, sans 1, maybe 2 pieces, but we've got a whole episode to dedicate to figuring out what the bullpen's going to be coming up on Bleav in Mariners. So we'll talk about that very shortly. But on the offensive side of the ball, watching all these players bounce back, watching, some of these young guys taking advantage of their at-bats, Ryan Bleav really getting into that ball off the center field fence, J.P. Crawford getting a couple of hits against the D-backs on Monday. It really gets me to thinking. I think the biggest question, though, in my head is this, as I'm thinking about the Seattle Mariners' hopeful success in 2025 after this first spring training weekend of action. Are we witnessing the return of the Mitch-Wich? Of course, Garver getting in with a couple of hits on Monday, and then Mitch Haniger having a nice home run on Sunday. So seeing these guys hitting the ball really, really hard. Garver, it was a nice tweet, I Bleav, by Steve, Mariners fan, on X. I have it right in front of me. I mean, it is worth pointing out that he did hit the ball exit velo 111.6 miles an hour. And he was one of the leaders of the day in spring training that day with his 2 hits, way over his exit velo in 2024 at best, which was 108.7 last season. So he's already hitting the ball harder. Garver seems to be feeling looser. We've seen multiple media members like Ryan Divish and others commenting on how, now that it's kind of a new slate, new beginning, so to speak, for Mitch Garver, he's kind of opened back up. He doesn't really feel as much pressure to be like the guy trying to change the offense for Seattle, but coming in, essentially contributing as the backup catcher, contributing as maybe a part-time designated hitter. For him mentally, hopefully that's easier to handle. And we saw that could be easier for him to handle, because we're talking about 2 really hard hits that he had over the weekend, as well as Mitch Haniger's home run. But you got to lean on these guys, essentially, right? It is imperative, and I hate that we're saying this, but let's not even debate like that I hate that I'm saying this, or, you sit on the side of thinking that the Mariners should be, keeping with this same roster from last year into this season, or you thought the Mariners should have spent more money. Regardless of whether you're a fan or not of ownership or Jerry DiPoto, the lack of offseason action or whatever, the fact that Mitch Haniger and Mitch Garver are back on the roster, they're both here making $27 million between them plus, it means the success of the Mariners heavily depends on the success of the Mitch-Wich. That, unfortunately, under the current front office plan, that cog needs to spin for the Mariners to get to the playoffs and beyond this season. That is too expensive of a combination, 27 plus $28 million between them. They're just too expensive not to be getting at bats. If those 2 can hit against left-handed pitching, which I Bleav they were both out against left-handers, Garver and Haniger, and they once again did look good, and they can resemble, either like an old version of themselves, or heck, like odd year Mitch Garver, good position players, positive WAR players. I mean, at this point, replacement players would be okay. Like a 0.0 war is better than a negative war, and we'd take that, I think, from the Mitches this season. We want more, of course, but anything's better than last year in 2024. But however you want to frame it, like if they could be good platoon players, so to speak, the Mariners will win. If they are good, the Mariners will win the AL West. If the Mitch-Wich tastes amazing, if you bite into that and you're getting that flavor, if we're seeing great base hits, if we're seeing home runs from these guys, the Mariners will win the AL West. And I don't think that's a very hard prediction to make, frankly. 2024 early season for Garver, for Haniger, it was ass. And if those early season at bats last season went any differently for those two, the Mariners would have been in the playoffs. I mean, we've talked about it several times. You can talk about, failed bullpen appearances. You can talk about at bats here and there, but it was one freaking game. And I'm not saying like the Mariners could have marched on to the World Series if they made the playoffs last year, but I'm just trying to point out that like these early season at bats by Garv Sauce, by Haniger are imperative to the Mariners' success. But hey, we got to make sure that we pull it back a little bit, right? We saw Garver strike out twice on Friday, and people were saying on Twitter, oh, don't overreact to such a bad performance. But then after he got 2 hits, people were super excited to point out how his exit velo was higher than any point that it was last season. I'm here with you. I just talked about it. I pointed it out. Great tweet from Steve to say that, but and I want to root for something positive, but we do need to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves after one successful performance or a couple of successful performances either. I know that we are begging for it, but you can't say, oh, hey, he's striking out a couple of times on one side. Don't pay attention to that. And then as soon as he gets any hits that you like, okay, he's back. Like, I want him to be back. I want Mitch Haniger to be back. But I see a lot of people on X and on Twitter or whatever the hell you want to call it, on Instagram and any other social media platform that Mariners fans are on, posting about not getting too ahead of ourselves on Friday after a couple of strikeouts. And then the same breath, people are just freaking out. And it's definitely a nice thing to see. Mitch Garver was legitimately hitting the cover off the ball over the weekend. And I think that that's something that, at least after the first game of him getting a couple of hits, it's something that seems more likely coming up this year in 2025 than we saw last season. But once again, the success of the Seattle Mariners is going to depend heavily on the success of the Mitch-Wich. You can't have those two guys basically dragging you down, weighting you down throughout the season. They're 2 of your highest paid guys outside of Julio. And unfortunately, if they don't work, the Seattle Mariners aren't working either. But if they do, and if we see what we're seeing in this first part of spring training from them, yeah, the Mariners will absolutely win the AL West. And that is going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Mariners. Next episode, I really do want to look at the Mariners bullpen, and I'll dive into a theory I've got about the Mariners offense that no one is really talking about. Just formulating some research on that. Want to present some numbers and present a couple arguments for the fans to respond to on Bleav in Mariners. Hey, make sure to give the podcast a 5-star rating and review, or subscribe to the channel and like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Appreciate everybody downloading and listening to the show or watching the show on YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in any way that you do and any way that you can. Stay safe out there and keep those tridents up, Mariners fans. See you soon.